Hello and welcome to round 4 of the SCG Invitational Qualifier here in sunny Doncaster, and we have Eduardo against Quinton, and I'll let Boomer handle the surnames and the deck.
Okay, it's Eduardo Sajgalik, who's one of the UK's Pro Tour top 8ers, or at least can claim to have a Pro Tour top 8 in his resume, and he's playing against Quinton Lip, who's playing Rakdos Aggro. At least Eduardo's being nice that in the fact that he's playing blue-white flash, which is seen as a control deck. At least he's playing quickly, or at least there's a lot of activity on that side. Whether he's playing quicker.
So what's the big cards in both players' decks here that we'll be looking towards?
It's quite interesting, really, because the Rakdos Aggro deck, you'd say it revolves mainly around Hellrider, but it's the beginning of its game is still very good with the zombie beginnings, where it has Diagraphical Gravecrawler and Geralf's Messenger to really make a dent early, and then Hellrider just to be a finisher. I'd say if you wanted a key card in Eduardo's deck, it'd probably either be Restoration Angel or Sphinx's Revelation. But it really depends what deck he's up against. Against a control deck, Geist of Saint Draft is obviously going to be a lot more devastating than many of the other cards in his deck. That's Knight of Infamy coming out for Quinton there. Eduardo with the big stop, none shall pass, coming up there.
What can he really do with one mana though, is the question here.
Unsummon is the most likely answer. He unsummons the Knight of Infamy, so therefore the Diagraphical can't attack through the Ogre of Bolas. So he's all about buying time in this game, Eduardo. And that's Moorland Haunt, which is a card that's going to buy him an awful lot of time as the game progresses.
Yeah, talking about this Ogre of Bolas, it's really one of the most annoying cards for aggro decks to have to beat through.
Yes, it reminds me of one of my favourite cards of all time, which is Court Hussar from Dissension. Similar in the way 1/3 provides card advantage, and if you're an aggro deck like a Rakdos deck or a red deck, you are absolutely loath to point a removal spell at it in order to force damage through, but often you have no choice. And especially with Restoration Angel in Eduardo's deck, it just creates it creates almost an inevitability throughout the whole game. We're just trying to find Eduardo some tokens at the moment. We'd rather him not use dice on camera if we can avoid it.
Now this isn't really the greatest start from Quinton.
No, but the Rakdos deck tends to be it tends to have a lot more mid-range and late-game to it than a standard sort of all-in aggro deck would have. Mainly based around this card, Falcon Wrath Aristocrat. It also could have a card like Hellrider or Thundermoor Hellkite. So it certainly has 4s and 5s in it, whereas your more standard sort of aggro deck.
Now we've talked about the Aristocrat in the past. Really, we were saying, you know, how little play Tragic Slip gets, that it just basically gives you Aristocrat free reign.
Yeah, trying to destroy the Aristocrat with damage is an exercise in futility usually. Most players have resorted, if you're a control deck, a lot of players have resorted to Terminus. And the other option, of course, is to simply just try and remove everything else, at which point the Aristocrat's just a 4/1 flyer, which, while it's still not terrible, Phantasmal Forces hasn't really been a card that people have been playing for a long period of time.
But in the whole time that's going on, you know, it is beating you up.
Yeah, it's an excellent card. I mean, there's a reason why people are paying sort of £15 for it at the moment. Well, there's 2 of them on the board. That makes things an awful lot more difficult for Eduardo. Of course, with Moorland Haunt, he can kind of try and grind the Aristocrats down. Especially since Quinton doesn't have anything with Undying on the board, he can just try and grind them a little bit. And with his feeling of dread there, Eduardo's just buying more and more time, and the Knight of Infamy is forced to just come in alone at this point.
So, you know, what's Eduardo hoping to see then when he's buying all these turns?
Really, he's trying to find something that'll put pressure on Quinton. More than likely a Restoration Angel. He might play Geist main deck as well, Geist of Saint Draft. He's really just looking to try and find a way to get a couple of attacks in at this point, which are big enough to deal Quinton enough damage. It's still not looking great for him because I don't think he has any way to permanently deal with those aristocrats.
So maybe sending in just the army of 1/1s and keeping a couple of chumps back each turn.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty much a losing battle, but I think at this point he has to play in that way really. If Quinton drops a Hell Rider or a Thundermaw Hellkite here, then Eduardo's in all sorts of trouble. But it's often quite interesting when you see someone playing a Rakdos deck. The fact that he hasn't slammed something down instantly more than likely says that he doesn't really have that third card. That
I mean, would Quinton be aware of every card in Eduardo's deck at this point? Would he be fearing any potential counter spells or Wrath of God effects?
The only thing he might fear is a counter spell. I don't think he's going to be too worried about a Supreme Verdict effect, mainly because the blue-white flash deck is a creature deck itself. You know, it plays sort of 12 to 15 creatures, so playing Wrath of Gods in that deck generally isn't going to happen. So he's just looking to try and keep the pressure up at this point. The blue-white flash deck really just thrives when it's given time. And as you have noticed there, Eduardo blocked with one of his spirits, and Quinton sacrificed his Geralf's Messenger, making it indestructible and also draining Eduardo for 2. But this is how Eduardo will try and get back into the game with Sphinx's Revelation, one of the core cards for any blue-white deck in Standard at the moment.
It was interesting actually as the set came out. I think it's safe to say Sphinx's Revelation was a bit of a sleeper on that front.
At the start of the set, there were a few people who looked at the card and went, yeah, this is pretty good, but it was still seen in that line like kind of like Blue Sun Zenith was when it was out. It was sort of a card you play 1, maybe 2 of in your deck. And then once people finally realised how good it is, it's the standard number, certainly in bank control, is 4. And the only reason that the flash decks don't play 4 a lot of the time is just because they don't have the mana to support 4. Because generally you want Sphinx's Revelation to be around 3 or 4, and the flash decks do try and cheat a little bit on mana, so you can't get those enormous Sphinx's Revelations that a banned deck can, where the first Sphinx's Revelation is often for 3 or 4, and the next one you can see it being for 6 or 7 that just closes the game up.
But you know, even so, Eduardo's down to 10 at this point, and it's kind of at that point where a top deck from Quinton is just going to end the game now.
Pretty much. I mean, if he gets a, as I said, I mean, Thundermaw Hellkite here would be devastating because it would kill all of Eduardo's spirit tokens.
And the Hell Rider.
Hell Rider would just do 6 damage before any damage was dealt. So it looks like he's still in it, but we're just awaiting the next thing to fall off the top of Quinton's library. Of course, Eduardo's got to be very careful in combat as well here, because with Quinton playing cards like Brimstone Volley, he can bring Eduardo very close to dead in a very short period of time. Looks like I thought Quinton was going to turn all the boys sideways there, but it just looks like his 4 power guys are going in at this point.
Certainly it's very hard for Eduardo to actually focus on getting Quinton's life down at this point.
Yeah, it's one of the things that separates a good player with these sort of mid-range decks from a very average one, is that when you are behind in these sorts of decks, you've still got to try and nick in that little bit of damage, because that really could make that 1 or 2 points of difference, could really make the difference later in the game. Eduardo's going to put his Ogre of Bolas in the bin. I imagine we're going to see the Diagraph Ghoul being sacked to the... yeah, it's not really doing a huge amount here. The only thing it's doing is waiting for Hell Rider to fall off the top of the library, really. Nice play by Eduardo there. He puts the Aristocrat back on top of Quinton's library. And he's going to take 4 off the unblocked Aristocrat. So obviously Eduardo knows that Quinton's drawing Aristocrat again next turn, so he's not under danger of dying to a Hell Rider, but he's still in a little bit of trouble here.
Another guy from Quinton there at the end of the turn.
Yeah, and Knight of Infamy is protection from white as well, so it's pretty dangerous for Eduardo to have a couple of them out there, because he just can't block them in his deck here. He also does seem to have drawn quite a lot of land. It's quite rare that the blue-white flash deck makes all its land drops up to turn 8. I mean, it can do because it does see so much of its deck, but at this point I would surmise that Eduardo had a pretty bad Sphinx's Revelation there, and he's just really not drawn a huge amount off it. We haven't seen a Restoration Angel yet, which I would be pretty much certain we'd be seeing with that Augur of Bolas out there. So see him bending all our tokens there. He's looking at trying again. He's just trying to nip in that little bit of damage and keeping himself alive. But he knows he's pretty much dead to any sort of real action coming from Quinton's deck here.
He's certainly trying to represent something.
That's Victim of Night, which Quinton's just played, and that means that those Knights of Infamy are now completely unblockable. So Eduardo's going to have something here to stay alive, because he knows that the Aristocrat's coming off the top of the deck. So whether it's a Feeling of Dread or an Unsummon or something like that, he's got to find a way to stay alive here. Yeah, there's Feeling of Dread, so he taps down the 2 biggest guys, but that's still 4 coming in now. So he is dead to pretty much any burn spell at this point. Now, one thing I might want to ask you in this situation is, would you believe that Quinton has a burn spell here? The fact he hasn't played that Aristocrat, he's pretty much representing that burn spell, isn't he? So,
well, of course, if you just pass, you know, you are giving that fact away as well.
Well, it's the fact that he's attacked as well, because the Aristocrat does have haste, so, and he's got a Cavern on Vampire in play, so it's not like Eduardo can counter it. And Eduardo's making a token at end of turn there, and yeah, Quinton's just Brimstone volleying him in response, and that's the game right there. I don't think there's much Eduardo could do there. He's just got to represent Dissipate and hope that Quinton doesn't fire it at him.
Anyway, so on to game 2.
You were right about the gas being milled away.